Good morning, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everybody to meeting number 11 of the General Government Licensing Committee. I'd also like to wish everybody a happy, healthy, and prosperous New Year, and those that are celebrating the Eastern Orthodox Christmas, a Merry Christmas. I'd also like to welcome committee members, to any members of council in attendance today, to members of the public, and to the media. You can follow the agenda and debate on your computer, tablet, or smartphone at www.toronto.ca/council. The General Government Licensing Committee acknowledges the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty number 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. There's speakers that are registered or on the green sheets before you. There's some correspondence as well. And we will go through the agenda. First off, is there any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act? Seeing none, I need a motion to confirm the minutes of our last meeting on December 2nd, 2019. Councillor Holyday, all in favor? Carried. Communications and reports. Communications are before you. Our first item is GL 11.1. It's the Sustainable Investing at the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement System, or OMERS. That's a presentation. Number 2. Metropolitan Toronto Pension Plan, Termination, Wind-Up, and Surplus Distribution. Anybody want to move the recommendations? Councillor Karygiannis is moving the recommendations. All in favor? Carried. Number 3 is deferred from our last meeting, the automated income verification for property tax, water, and solid waste relief programs. Councillor Karygiannis is holding number 3. Number 4, review of enhanced security measures at Toronto City Hall. We're holding that one for deputations. Number 5, proposed sale of 20 Castlefield Avenue and 565 Duplex Avenue in the Yonge-Eglinton area. Councillor Filion is holding number 5. Number 6, expropriation of temporary and permanent easement at 2333 and 2295 Dundas Street West for a municipal shelter. Councillor Nunziata is moving number 6. All in favor? Carried. Number 7 is the real estate acquisitions and expropriation of property requirements near Spadina subway station for easier access phase 3 project. Councillor Holyday is moving number 7. All in favor? Carried. Number 8, real estate acquisition and expropriation of property requirements near the Greenwood subway station for easier access phase 3 project. Councillor Holyday is moving the recommendations on number 8. All in favor? Carried. Number 9, amendment to purchase order number 6040342 with Osler, Huskin, and Harcourt LLP for construction law support and litigation services for the Union Station revitalization project. Councillor Holyday is moving the recommendations for number 9. All in favor? Carried. Number 10, amendment to blanket contract number 47021763 with Enterprise Car Share and 47019969 with Zipcar Canada Incorporated for car sharing services. I've actually got some questions of staff on this, so I'm going to hold it. Number 11, amendment to purchase order number 6047698 issued to SAP Canada Incorporated for procurement of additional professional services for success factors for the city's enterprise-wide transformation project. And I've got some questions on that one too. I'm going to hold that one in my name. Number 12, authority to negotiate a new subordinate agreement with Open Text Corporation, the province of Ontario's existing vendor of record. Councillor Holyday, moving up. All in favor? Carried. Okay, we're going back to our first item, which is a presentation, Sustainable Investing by OMERS. Good morning, everyone. Whenever you're ready, the lights on the microphones, when you turn those on, your speakers run. And you can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning. My name is George Cook. I'm the chair of OMERS Administration Corporation, and I have with me today three colleagues. From my far left, Catherine Preston, who is our Vice President of Sustainable Investing, Satish Rai, who is our Chief Investment Officer, and Michael Kelly, who is General Counsel, and more pertinent in terms of today is the actual chair of our Sustainable Investing Committee, which is a committee made up that is cross-functionally populated with OMERS people. We're here this morning in response to a request from your chair that was sent in early November to come and talk to you about our approach to managing global warming risk in our investment activities. And particular reference was noted in that request as to how, as fiduciaries, we go about managing the demands of doing things that will help solve climate change challenges while ensuring good returns for OMERS beneficiaries. There was a specific request that our CIO and a member of our investment committee attend. Satish is the CIO. I am a member of our investment committee as well as being the board chair. And we're here this morning. We have a brief presentation, and then we're more than prepared to take questions. Michael Kelly, who chairs our committee, is going to undertake the presentation.
That's great. Thank you, George, and thanks for having us here today. We're pleased to speak to you about our approach to sustainable investing at OMERS. It was interesting to get Councillor Ainsley's letter and his references to fiduciary obligations and governance framework and exclusions and how we think about all these issues. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about these issues. They're very pertinent to how we invest our, in excess of $100 billion across the globe. We do believe that the world is in a transition to a lower carbon economy, and we want to be on the front foot in terms of how we think about how that affects us at OMERS. So today we're going to talk about how our governance framework works at OMERS, how we think about these issues, and we'd be happy to take any questions to discuss that in any further detail. So what are the key pillars of our approach at OMERS? Foundationally, first of all, we have a set of policies and procedures. So we have a sustainable investing policy. It's on our website, so it's available for anyone to read. And underlying that are a set of guidelines. We have specific guidelines on ESG and guidelines on climate change. And underneath that are a set of procedures for each of our investing entities. And for those of you who aren't as familiar with OMERS, think about our investing platforms. We have about half our balance sheet in public markets, traditional stocks and bonds, and the other half in privates or alternative assets, so real estate, infrastructure, private equity, and underneath private equity, growth equity and ventures, OMERS Ventures. So we have various platforms across OMERS. The governance framework we think is critical, pillar to our approach. One of the key areas here is how do you make decisions on these issues? These issues are very complex. They're far-reaching in the future, but they're also present. And so how do we think about how the board relates to senior management, how senior management relates to each of our investment platforms? So that's a critical pillar of our approach. And that's when we say coordination across investment platforms. We have very strong investment platforms. Oxford is our real estate company. OMERS Infrastructure, formerly known as Borealis, you would have heard of. These invest directly in assets. And it's important for us as OMERS to think about how we are coordinating our approach across these platforms so that we're not individual platforms doing things separately. Collaborating with peers is also a key element of our approach. So we collaborate with peers like the CPPIB, Ontario Teachers, the federal government on various initiatives, international pension plans, and other institutional investors. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then finally, reporting and communications. So we're making an effort to improve our reporting in this area, including in our annual report and otherwise, including through events such as the one today. So what is our strategy on sustainable investing? Overarching it is a belief that well-run organizations with sound environmental, social, and governance practices will perform better, particularly over the long term. So we do link this to value and to risk. This is not, we do have corporate social responsibility program, but this is not corporate social responsibility. This is our investing program. And we do link these issues to the value of investments and to the risk in those investments. And so we do that through 4 pillars, as we call them. The first is an integration strategy. So we integrate ESG factors into our investment analysis before we buy assets, and into our asset management practices when we own these assets. And we believe that that gives us a more holistic view about risk and about value in these assets. The second pillar is engaging. Because we own a lot of these companies directly, we either have board seats or we're active in terms of how we interact with those investments. So in the private markets, it's more of a direct engagement. And then the publics, we do it through proxy voting and through also meeting with senior executives of these public companies. Collaboration, as I mentioned, we meet with and we're involved in various organizations with like-minded institutions because we believe that creates a more powerful voice on these issues. And fourthly, and also a critical component, is adaptability. Things are changing in this area. Even in I've been actively involved in this area for the last couple of years, and even within those 2 years, so much has changed. So we want to be nimble and be able to adapt to new and evolving trends, regulations, etc. ESG is a word or an acronym that we hear a lot about, but what does it actually mean? It can mean different things to different institutions. We at OMERS took a scan of the investing world in terms of how do people think about what E and S and G means, and these are the ones that we think are most relevant to us. That doesn't mean that they're the exclusive ESG factors, but they're the ones that we asked our investment people to focus on in particular. And so when we're doing due diligence on an investment potential asset, we've developed a set of questions that our portfolio managers should be asking in terms of these particular items. And to the extent that they're material relating to the investment, then we expect that would be brought forward to the approving body. So you can see in environmental, there are some of the obvious ones: climate change, pollution, resource efficiency, extreme weather events. Would they have an impact on that asset? On the governance side, switching to the right, these are things that we are very comfortable with. We often deal with, we negotiate our own shareholder rights at OMERS when we own private companies, board structure, cybersecurity, risk management, anti-corruption, anti-money laundering. In the middle is the social, and these are the ones that we're focusing a lot with our people on because it's not always natural to an investment professional to think about what we mean here. But for example, on government and community relations, it's about the organizations or the company's social license to operate. We want people to be thinking about that and how they interact with their various communities and governments in the jurisdictions in which they operate. And as OMERS expands globally, this becomes more challenging for us and requires more resources to understand these different societies. Other things, obviously, Indigenous rights, product stewardship, health and safety is often a component in a lot of our infrastructure assets. And when we look at these factors, they're not just the risks inherent in these factors, but many organizations today have a lot of opportunities related to this because they're doing very good things in these areas that we think is going to add value to these companies in the future. How does our governance framework work at OMERS? Well, we think about this from the board level, the senior executive team level, and down to the investment asset platform. So at the board level, the board does approve our sustainable investing policy. And for us, it's critical that we have the tone from the top coming right from our board chair and our board of directors and our investment committee of the board. So they are responsible to approve that sustainable investing policy every year. At the senior executive team level, so this would be the highest level in terms of our management team at OMERS, they approve the guidelines, the ESG guidelines and the climate change guidelines. And if we're going to do a public endorsement of of any organization. So the most recent one was the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. That would be something that would go to the senior executive team for approval. When we get down to our individual investment platforms, as I mentioned, we've got Oxford, Infrastructure, Private Equity, and Capital Markets. They're responsible to develop the asset-specific procedures about how they are integrating ESG factors into their investment analysis and their asset management. You can imagine that investing in the capital markets where you're buying and selling stocks and bonds is a very different procedure than when you're investing in an infrastructure asset such as a port or a transmission line. Different timelines, different ways to approach ESG. So the procedures are tailored to each of these asset classes so that they work for those investment professionals. And then we have the Sustainable Investing Committee, which I'm chairing, that brings together individuals from each of these investment platforms and also functional areas like finance, legal, communications, and risk. And that committee meets regularly, and we make sure that we are collaborating across the various asset platforms. We make recommendations to the senior executive teams on things like TCFD. And it's both an education committee and also a best practices and making sure that we're being consistent across our organization. So that's broadly how we think about governance on these issues at OMERS. There's a bit of an alphabet soup of organizations across the globe that are looking at these issues, and these are just a small, very small subset of it, but these are ones that we are involved in. And so this is how we collaborate with our like-minded institutions and other organizations. I'll note one on the left-hand side called Investor Leadership Network. This arose out of the G7 meetings in Charlevoix in 2018, where various Canadian pension plans partnered with the federal government to create this leadership network. And they look at three streams: how to develop sustainable infrastructure in emerging countries, emerging markets, diversity and inclusion in the investment world, and climate risk reporting. So that's an example of how we collaborate with our peers through this organization and these work streams. Other ones you may be familiar with: the Canadian Coalition for Good Governance. It's a corollary on the international stage, which is the International Corporate Governance Network. Accountants for Sustainability is another similar one. So there are many organizations that we do get involved with to lend our voice to what they are doing in this area. Two that stand out, I think, of particular relevance to OMERS are the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, and SASB. SASB is a Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. These are both frameworks that are advocating for better disclosure on climate risks for companies. So this is critical to an investor like us. What we want to see is how companies are thinking about climate risks in their own businesses, both in the present, in the future, whether it be actual physical risk, such as extreme weather events, transition risks such as new policies or consumer demand preferences. And we feel that these two organizations are ones that are trying to improve the disclosure in this area, which helps organizations like OMERS make better investment decisions and capital allocation decisions. And so if we can make better capital allocation decisions around climate risk, then we think that is a good thing for efficient capital markets, and we're putting our money into the right spaces. So these are two particular organizations where we have we're a strong advocate of them. Obviously, one of the focus areas on sustainability at OMERS is on climate change. Again, we look at different kinds of risks. There is the physical risk, so you might see these in our real estate portfolio. We look at our insurance premiums. We look at heat maps across the world in terms of flood risk. But those are the physical risks of climate change, which can include extreme weather events or chronic events. And then there's transition risk, which are the developing government policies in these areas, carbon pricing, clean tech, energy, consumer demand preferences, which are constantly changing. So as I mentioned, the TCFD is one way where we're trying to surface these risks in the companies that we invest in. But how do we think about it across the hundreds of assets that we have in our OMERS portfolio? Well, we've created a sub-work to look at climate risk in particular. The first thing we're doing is carbon footprinting. So this is looking at across our portfolio, what is our carbon footprint, taking a point in time a number of years ago to today. And again, this is developing information for us about how our particular portfolio is shifting over time. Another thing that we're starting to look at and that other pension plans and investors like us are looking at is scenario analysis. So what would our portfolio look like in a 1.5 degree warming scenario, 2 degree warming scenario, higher degree warming scenario? And there are various consultants around that are developing expertise in these areas. The data isn't perfect yet, but it's constantly improving, and we are keeping our eye on this and looking at how we can incorporate this into our own portfolio analysis. Here's a quick snapshot of some of the assets that we have at OMERS, not obviously all of them that are particularly affected by these issues. So ERM, Environmental Resources Management, we own this in our private equity portfolio. It's a leading global provider of environmental safety, risk, and social consulting services. We actually use them as a thought leader in developing our own policies in this area. The Stack is a real estate development underway in Vancouver. It's one of 2 high-rise towers to be part of our net zero carbon pilot. Leeward Renewable Energy is a major wind farm platform that we have in the United States, currently 19 wind farms, but it also allows us a platform to acquire further resources in this area. Bruce Power is our largest single investment. Emissions-free energy produces 30% of Ontario's power with 0 carbon emissions. I'm sure you're all familiar with that asset. Another small investment we have in our ventures portfolio is Arcturn Ventures, and again, that's focused on clean tech development, alternative battery-powered, all sorts of different new technologies that they are looking at Arcturn, which is very interesting for us. So obviously we have a very broad investment portfolio at OMERS, and this is just a snapshot of some of the assets that these particular issues affect quite dramatically. So I think that gives you a broad overview of how we think about these issues at OMERS. It's something very front of mind for us and for our board and for our senior executives. And with that, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate you coming in this morning, making the presentation. Are there any questions of the deputants? Councillor Holiday?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for speaking to us. Can you tell me a little bit about how you make decisions to shed assets? My suspicion is an investment from a long time ago might be something that is heavily contributing to your carbon footprint. And you may want to apply a lens of the environment on it to say it's time to get rid of this coal plant that we own. I mean, that's sort of tongue-in-cheek extreme, but I'm sure there's assets out there that aren't helping the carbon bottom line. And how do you balance that off on an asset that may be otherwise financially productive?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think the first thing I would say, and Satish, you can jump in if you'd like, is that we wouldn't shed an asset for non-financial reasons. And so I think our strategy is to be looking at these assets and again, applying these factors to the assets, not just when we buy it, but as we asset manage it over time. And so while we wouldn't shed an asset necessarily for a non-financial reason, when you integrate these factors into the asset and you start thinking about how some of these factors will affect that asset 5 or 10 years down the road, that may make that asset less attractive. And so our strategy right now is let's make sure that we're looking at all those factors as we look at our portfolio over time. We expect there will be a shift over time, but we're not doing a pure shedding of assets for a non-financial reason.
Okay. You mentioned the portfolio is quite diverse. It seems like everything from real estate to stock to private, and I guess even some companies in here that do things. Do you have an affiliate relationship code, or some sort of governance framework between the assets that you own? So let's say you invest in a green tech company. As owners of other physical assets, you'd be well positioned to make things work really well between the two of those. But there is some, I would imagine there are some rules between that, and how does that work?
Thank you. So you're right, there are many opportunities for our businesses to support each other, collaborate, and actually make them better. Even this last fall, we actually held an innovation summit with our leading technology environmental companies to provide their guidance and leadership to our bigger companies that we have out there. When those transactions do take place, if they do take place, they're all done at arm's length. What we as OMERS do is provide introductions to them. What we are finding is that something like a company like ERM, which is a portfolio company of ours, many of our portfolio companies are reaching out to them to seek their advice on how they can improve their own processes. So one of the benefits we have within OMERS is bringing companies together from around the world, sharing best practices, sharing experiences, and working with each other to move forward.
But at the end of the day, the portfolio is so large that you can actually do quite tidy business making money off of each other out of the assets that you own, right? You've got a bunch of real estate and a bunch of technology, and they seem to work together. And I'm assuming that occurs then by the sounds of it, but you have some controls in place so that you're not doing this directly.
Yeah, so we have a very strict governance protocol, and all conflicts will be reported to the board, if there are any, and all transactions above a certain dollar amount are reported to the board also.
I guess my last question was just about how do you know that the policies are right-sized or balanced correctly? Is there a mechanism to go back to the membership to say, you know, is our climate change policy aggressive enough, too aggressive? This is what it means. These are all of our policies. How do we, I guess we're all members. How do we know that you've got the right balance?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, but, well, we listen to the members, first of all, I mean, through our board, and, you know, these topics are typically high on the number of questions that we get at the annual general meeting, for example, but through our stakeholder relations group, we are constantly listening to what our members, you know, believe on this topic, and it's not, it's a wide, there's a diverse range of opinions. This, on these issues. These issues are complex, but you know, we're investing for our membership, and so we listen, whether it's through our board members or at annual meetings or at events like this, or even on our day-to-day. I've had some meetings with the City of Toronto on these issues in the past 6 months. And so we're constantly trying to understand how our membership feels about it. How to right-size the policies, we don't write the policy and then come back 4 years later to look at the policy again. These ones get looked at every year. And frankly, we're looking at them throughout the year too. As I mentioned, even in the last 2 years, I've been actively involved. This is such an evolving field. And one of the ways we get a best practices test is by our peers. And I would say, you know, the Caisse de dépôt and Ontario Teachers and CPPIB, these are you know, leaders in this space, and we're constantly talking with them about how do they think about these issues. And so we get a good market test, if you will, about how these major Canadian pension plans are thinking about these issues, and other institutional investors as well.
Can I just add something to that? Underlying all this is a statutory requirement to act in the financial interest of the plan members, which it makes us different than a different type of organization when we look at these things. So there's a balancing act. And we are fortunate to have a fairly diverse group of skills-based directors on our board that will bring you know, different perspectives to bear. And these matters are reviewed no less than annually in a very real way through our investment committee and then subsequently to the board. But when you represent over 1,000 employers and somewhere between 35 and 50 unions and bargaining agents, and a group of others that are not affiliated for purposes of negotiating, you can get some pretty diverse views. It's almost like being a counselor and talking to your constituents. And so I'm sure at any point in time, there's an expectation on any one of those groups that we should do exactly what they say. The reality is we can't. We have to balance a number of competing interests. The chairs of the large Canadian pension plans meet annually. We talk about these things. And one of the things that has disturbed me the most is the willingness of some to make assertions of behavior that they can't possibly comply with. And from our perspective, one of the things that we've tried to do is temper that temptation, if you will, by making sure that we actually are doing what we say we're doing. And when we indicate to our plan members and the constituents that represent them, that we actually are doing very much what we say we're doing. So you won't see, I don't think, a dramatic headline or a dramatic statement from us. But what you will see is probably the most thorough approach to these issues of any plan in Canada.
Thank you, Councillor Holyday. We're just going to vary the order a bit. Councillor Fletcher was listening to the presentation in our office and had some questions.
Channel 99, it's really the most exciting channel on, watch it all the time. And 98, when you, I'm just, were there changes to your governance structure this year for OMERS, for the board? Or has there in the past been QP or other large unions that have a significant amount of money in the plan on the board, or do I have that wrong?
I don't think there's been any material change to our governance structure in the sense of who actually comprises the seats on the board. There's been internal changes to the way we look at ESG and other factors, but those are all changes that are within the control of the board.
So there's still labor representation on your board?
Over the last 6 years, following on from the Tony Dean work that was done in 2012, we've moved at the Admin Corp to a skills-based board. But the way those directors get to the board is through nomination from the various sponsors. There would be seven employee-type sponsors. There'd be 7 employer-type sponsors. They each nominate people through a process to our board, but that hasn't changed. It hasn't really changed since 2012.
Is the City of Toronto representative on the board?
Yes, David Beattie sits as a member of the Admin Corp board, and I'm sure you all know Joe Penichetti, who sits as a member of the Sponsors Corporation
Are
board.
there any labor representatives on your skill-based board? Labor representatives on your skill-based?
Yes, there are.
From which unions?
There are two. QP has not endorsed the notion of skills-based necessarily the way others have, and so there are 2 actual QP members sitting on our board. But the other unions that would have skills-based directors there would be OPSU, teachers, fire, police.
OPSU, teachers, fire, and police. And you said you've got a lot of corporations. There's the City of Toronto. What's the 5 largest contributors to OMERS?
Which organizations?
Yes.
Heavens, well, QP would be by far the largest union.
I meant contributors.
When you, in terms of the employers that are
Correct.
paying. I guess it would be, the City of Toronto would certainly be the largest municipality, and it's probably the largest contributor. In terms of the employers, you go through you go through police boards, you go through the Electrical Distributors Association, those sorts of, you go through school boards, but I would think clearly you would probably be number 1. I actually don't look.
Is that on your website, or could you provide that perhaps for council where we can?
It's on I believe it's on our website. We can certainly provide it. It's quite public.
Yes, but I mean as far as from biggest,
Sure.
smallest. I don't think that's on your website.
I believe you can derive that information from the website if it's not explicit.
But I'm actually not going to go on and do that.
No, so I will gladly.
I'm pretty busy now. We only have 25 wards. What's that? Not if I have to do all my own computations, Mr. Chair.
I leave it to the chair, but we're quite happy to provide the requested information.
That would be great. If I could have that for council, it'd be fantastic. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Councillor Fletcher, and Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Councillor Karygiannis, you have questions?
Thank you, Chair. And the following Councillor Fletcher, so just let me wish everybody Happy New Year, and to those celebrating Christmas, a Merry Christmas. Through you, Chair, to the deputants, number one, thank you for coming in today. I probably wasn't listening, I didn't catch it. Do we have a diversified portfolio within Canada, or are we also OMERS invests outside Canada?
Yeah, so I'll take that. So our balance sheet is a little over $100 billion today. Our Canadian exposure is approximately 30%. We're approximately 40% in the U.S., and then the other 30% is the rest of the world. Our balance sheet is diversified in multiple fashions. One is by real estate. We have real estate all over the world. We have infrastructure, we have private equity companies, and we have public securities, whether they're stocks or bonds. And then as a pension plan, I would probably say that we're probably more heavily weighted to Canada than some of the larger plans, just some of those local contexts. But we need the global diversification to achieve the returns.
Thank you. Can we break that down, please? You said your balance sheet is 100 million, or this is what your investment portfolio is. Is that 100 million?
Our balance sheet is over $100 billion in total.
Billion or million? Billion.
Yeah, this is all
So this is what we have to invest.
correct.
Okay. And 30% of that is in the United States?
In Canada,
In Canada?
yes.
In the United States, that 20?
40%
40%?
United States and 30% rest of the world.
Would you be able to sort of give us some countries where you're investing 30 billion outside Canada? Would that?
Yeah, so the most of the money that's outside of Canada is really in London and in Europe. And then we would have additional maybe 5% invested outside of Europe.
Where?
Something like Australia, we have $2.5 billion in Australia. We have about $2.5 billion in all of Asia combined.
Do we have any investments in countries that are troublesome, if I can put that in quotation?
Maybe you could give me an example of what your definition is.
Pakistan,
No.
China,
China, we don't have any direct investments. We might through Futures own.
India,
In India, we would have investments in India.
and are they secure?
Yeah, so the secured by the assets. So in India, for instance, we own one of the leading airports, which is called Bangalore Airport.
Bangalore Airport?
We also own a toll road in India, which is partnered with Canada Pension Plan. So these are high-quality assets.
Which toll road, the GTA?
Sorry, this is toll roads in India I was talking about.
Right, there's a toll road in India called the GTA. Would that be one of your assets?
They're actually a consortium of 14 different toll roads that we have. They're very, very small.
Okay, would you be able to provide me, please, a list of where we invest in Europe and in Asia offline? I mean, would you be able to send that to me?
Yeah, so, yeah, we can provide your country breakdown.
Okay.
Yeah, we can provide your country
And the
breakdown.
assets, probably.
Yeah, pardon me?
And the assets that we have invested in? Like in India, you said you got 14 toll roads.
So we do provide quite a bit of detail in our annual report, but broken down by country, broken down by assets. But we can provide country breakdown and major asset classes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Karygiannis. Other questions of the deputants? Seeing none, I just had a couple. I wanted to ask about your primary sources for research. So would that be, so you have the slide deck on page 6, and then you talked about the TCFD and the SASB. Would you consider those your primary research sources for developing your sustainable investment policies, or?
I think, yeah, so SASB is used by our capital markets because it provides a sector-by-sector analysis of the relevant ESG factors by sector. So that's very useful for our capital markets team as in terms of a research tool. TCFD is more about making sure that public companies in their own disclosure, that they're following a framework to talk about climate risk. So when we do company analysis, we would look at their disclosure, and if they are disclosing along the lines of TCFD, then they will have better disclosure than other companies. So we can always push for better disclosure. So, that's kind of primary research. We look at the companies themselves. There's other organizations that aren't even on this screen. One's called GRESB, which is a real estate framework and ranking organization. They do real estate and infrastructure, so that's another source of information. So it's a combination of just doing primary research. Like, we have developed at OMERS a list of detailed questions for each of these ESG factors that we talked about, that when we're looking at private companies, we go in and we ask the questions and we get them to give us the information, and then that information will either lead you to asking more questions or not. So it's a combination of, I would say, primary research on these companies, and then using organizations such as SASB, the TCFD framework, and other kinds of analysis like this to help us, particularly in the public markets where we're looking at more companies in a shorter period of time, if you will.
Okay, all right. And then how do you use that research to look around technological or economic shifts in the asset classes?
Well, we've got a group in the capital markets led by our chief economist, Robert Levine, who's actually, they do a lot of bigger picture research on this. If I'm getting your question. Also, our chief risk officer, Rodney Hill's leading a group to look at, we have risk appetite statements at OMERS, and then we have something called emerging risks. And so it's almost like a think tank within OMERS about what are the emerging risks that that aren't even in the spotlight right now, that might be 5 or 10 years down the road. So we have people within our organization who are spending their time thinking about how do all these factors relate to general economic trends, GDP growth. I mean, climate change is, when you look at heat maps, it will reflect, how these issues, should they come to bear, will affect GDP growth in this country versus that country. So there's all sorts of analysis that we can do. And so, and as I mentioned, the data on climate change is still evolving, developing. We think it will get better. It's getting better every year. But we try and gather all this information, determine materiality as it relates to the investment that we're working on. And to the extent it's material, we go a little bit deeper. But there are, as I say, a combination of these sources and others, plus people in our organization that are thinking about how this will play out over the next 5 to 10 years. At the end of the day, we're a long-term investor. We're thinking about these assets often over a 10-year period, even longer period. And so we're trying to project into the future how these issues will play out. And
you're doing that on a 5 to 10-year window?
It depends on the asset class, but for infrastructure, it really is 10 to 15 years. Like, we don't, in our infrastructure group, we don't buy things and flip them in 5 years. We buy them and we hold them for a long period of time. Private equity might be different. The horizon is usually, 6 to 8 years. But assets like real estate and infra, we're there for the long term, and that's why we like these asset classes. They're a good mix for our long-term obligations to our pensioners. And so when you buy things for a 10, 15-year horizon, there are lots of things that you have to think about that you maybe don't have to if you're buying and selling constantly, like some other non-pension investors might be doing.
Okay, all right. And then in the other page on the slide deck, you talked about physical risk and transition risk. And I guess in those, would you look at those, when you talk about risk for OMERS and ESG, are those the two biggest risk areas for you, or how would you categorize the risk over that 5 to 10-year window?
I think those are the two those are specifically climate, when we think about climate risk. So when we think ESG is sort of broader than climate change. So when we think about climate risk, the TCFD framework does talk about two main buckets of risk. Physical risk, this is risk of a flood, risk of an extreme weather event affecting the value of your asset. And then the second is this bucket of transition risks, which are the risks that all companies face as we transition to a lower carbon economy. Will the younger generation, for example, be interested in buying your product? Will there be technologies that replace your product? Will there be government policies such as carbon pricing that will either help or hurt your product? So that's how we look at climate risk. On ESG, it's, the risks are social license to operate. What if there's, an issue in the supply chain of this company with how they're treating their workers? Those are the broader risks that we think about on the broader ESG issues. These two, physical and transition, I think are more in the climate risk vernacular.
Okay, and then on the flip side, in terms of opportunity, where do you see the biggest opportunities for OMERS with ESG?
Well, on the energy side, I think we see a huge opportunity in renewables, and there's also an opportunity in clean tech. But there are a lot of other investors that are also interested in getting into renewables. So, these things, there's a balance there. We won't pay any price for an asset, but we think that there is a big opportunity there. There's still, there are still opportunities in the traditional energy space as well. This transition won't happen overnight. But I'd say on energy, it's in renewables. And on broader ESG factors, the factors are so broad, but we really want to look at companies that are thinking about, their social purpose in the world, their social license to operate, their governance structures. Have they had a history of, governance issues? Are they a well-functioning board? All these issues for us are, indications that over the long term, this company is set up for success.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in this morning. I think those are all the questions. And then we do have two members of the public that wanted to speak after you, so I don't know if you wanted to stay and listen to those. Thank you very much for coming in this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So we do have two members of the public that wanted to speak on this item. The first one is Eve Wyatt, and the second one listed is Rosemary Boisseau. Good morning. I don't know if you've been here before, so generally how it works with the registered public deputants is you have 5 minutes to address the committee. We can each ask you questions for up to 5 minutes. When this is all done, we also have an opportunity to ask our staff questions on this, and then each individual member of the committee can speak for up to 5 minutes. So for you, the clock's over there, and you have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. I'm here this morning to ask OMERS to step up to its fiduciary responsibilities in addressing the climate crisis, becoming part of the solution rather than part of this existential problem. My name is Eve Wyatt. I retired from senior management at GO Transit/Metrolinx after a 32-year career. I held a variety of positions leading developments in planning, policy, information technology, and customer service. OMERS provides my pension, as well as managing a significant portion of my RRSP investments as an additional voluntary contribution. As a young engineer, I was drawn to my career by the contribution public transit makes to environmental sustainability, including CO2 reduction, and the social health of our communities. It was a privilege to contribute to the evolution of GO Transit during the time I worked there, from a bare-bones commuter rail service into a bus and rail network that now delivers the significant environmental and social benefits associated with carrying 71 million regional trips each year. Many of the 500,000 public servants who are OMERS beneficiaries are also motivated by the benefits, including environmental sustainability, that their work provides. The need to act decisively and quickly to reduce CO2 emissions and address climate change is clear to us all. I recently reviewed the OMERS website to find out how OMERS is handling its responsibility to me and other beneficiaries with respect to risks and transitions associated with climate change, and I was very disturbed at what I found. Prominent on the site is the report by the Investment Leadership Network on implementation of the framework developed by the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. OMERS was notable by its absence in the examples of actions and commitments to advance the TCFD through disclosing and managing climate risk or alignment of investments with safe global climate. The report does not reflect any commitment by OMERS and has the appearance of window dressing. OMERS Sustainable Investing Policy describes a sustainable investment committee reporting at the highest level of the organization. However, climate change is nowhere called out in the policy, and the terms of reference of this committee are vague and passive. The OMERS strategy, approved in 2019, makes no reference to climate change. The OMERS 2020 strategy asserts that, quote, there is a vital role for responsible and long-term investors to provide leadership on the cleaner and safer production and transportation of traditional energy. How can supporting this activity through investment be consistent with the requirement to reduce CO2 emissions and move to a net zero carbon economy? You, who are managing nearly $100 billion of our retirement assets, do not seem to be proactive in managing climate risk. There's no indication of any commitment to reducing holdings in companies and assets that contribute to CO2 in the atmosphere, nor to investing for impact in the growing activity providing the solutions needed to avoid dangerous climate change. The analysis in the report Shift, Action for Pension Wealth and Planet Health of OMERS progress in addressing climate risk and seizing low-carbon opportunities places OMERS at the starting line, the lowest of 4 possible assessments of progress and among the least responsive of the 10 Canadian pension plans reviewed. OMERS has a fiduciary responsibility to manage the risks to me and all beneficiaries now and in the future. This includes young employees that have just begun paying into their OMERS pension and will be affected by risks associated with climate change for the next decades. But there's no sign of any assessment of the risk climate change poses to OMERS' portfolio. You seem to be committed to investing in companies and assets that will be highly impacted by future regulatory, legal, and transition risks of climate change, while continuing to contribute to CO2 concentrations that will make the problem worse. OMERS needs to explain how investing in companies whose core business could make the planet uninhabitable is consistent with its fiduciary responsibility to all your beneficiaries, young and old alike. Following up on today's presentation, I would like responses from OMERS on 3 questions. You say that you wouldn't shed an asset for non-financial reasons, but you have 22 ESG factors, of which climate change and pollution are 2. How are these weighted? Is climate change, which is an existential threat, prioritized in any way? And how do these actually affect decisions? The second question, what evidence can OMERS provide that your engagement with investees is actually leading to positive outcomes? And third, when and how will OMERS introduce disclosure to demonstrate effective fiduciary responsibility on these matters to your beneficiaries, and specifically be making its carbon footprint analysis available to the public and beneficiaries? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right on time. Are there any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming in this morning. Really appreciate it. And next is Rosemary Boisseneau. Good morning, Ms. Boisseneau. I don't know if you heard the instructions I gave Ms. Wyatt, but same thing, same for you. And you can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm a resident of Ward 24 and a volunteer with the climate justice advocacy group Climate Fast. I commend the General Government and Licensing Committee for seeking information about the climate-related sustainable investing of its employees' pension fund, and I thank the OMERS representatives for preparing today's presentation to help beneficiaries, taxpayers, and city officials better understand how OMERS is responding to the challenge of the climate crisis. Just a few months ago, on September 27th, tens of thousands of Torontonians overwhelmed the downtown streets in a protest calling for governments to take decisive and immediate action to address the climate crisis and lead the just transition to a low-carbon economy. By the next week, in early October, the City Council unanimously adopted a motion declaring a climate emergency in Toronto. As part of the emergency declaration, the City directed the CFO and Treasurer to take steps necessary to, quote, become a green investment city by reflecting current responsible investment practices, excluding fossil fuels from the portfolio, and actively investing in clean energy and climate solutions, end quote. As an employer, the City contributes to OMERS directly through its employer contributions and indirectly by providing the wages that are deducted for the employees' contributions. According to a 2016 City report, the City of Toronto is the largest OMERS employer and contributor. Including its corporations and agencies, the City was responsible for approximately 18% of OMERS' overall contributions. In 2015, these contributions totaled almost $385 million. These are significant amounts, and Toronto, under a climate emergency, must ensure that they are being invested in ways that will lead us to a low-carbon future in line with the emission reduction targets committed to in the Climate Paris Agreement. I know that as a deputant, I am not supposed to ask questions. However, I would like to provide some information and then suggest a few questions the committee members might choose to ask the OMERS representatives. At the moment, OMERS does not publicly disclose information on the carbon intensity of its portfolio, but thanks to the research done by Shift Action, we still have some idea of OMERS investments in this regard. For instance, it does invest in some climate solutions, such as those assets highlighted in this presentation. However, OMERS also continues to invest in coal, oil, gas, and pipeline companies. For example, last year, it doubled its investment in TC Pipelines, formerly known as TransCanada, and now owns almost $378 million worth of the TC stocks. TC's reputation regarding Indigenous rights is reprehensible, provoking many protests recently. This raises several questions. First, what percentage of assets under OMERS management are currently allocated towards high-carbon holdings, such as coal, oil, gas, refining, and fossil fuel transportation companies? Conversely, what percentage of assets under OMERS management are currently allocated towards profitable low-carbon holdings, including renewable energy, green bonds, and sustainable real estate? Thirdly, has OMERS developed clear targets and a timeline for significantly increasing low-carbon investment and reducing high-carbon investments over time to ensure its holdings are in line with the Paris Agreement commitments to reduce carbon emissions? And lastly, to ensure greater transparency, has OMERS set a clear timeline for implementing the recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Fiscal Disclosures? As part of my deputation, I am submitting a full list of questions on OMERS climate risk that has been compiled by Shift Actions for you to take a look at. Thank you once again for allowing me time to speak and for giving serious consideration to these matters.
Thank you, Rosemary. Ms. Boisano, are there any questions of the deputant? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming in this morning. Are there any questions of staff on this item? No? Seeing none. Speakers? No? Okay. I did have a motion, sorry, two motions that I'd like to move. The first one, sorry, just had a technical amendment to clear up. So I would just like, I have the first motion I would like to move that City Council direct the City Manager, Chief Financial Officer and Treasurer and the City Solicitor to meet with senior OMERS investment management staff in the first quarter of 2020 on the following: how OMERS manages a global portfolio over $100 billion in public and private investments, and each asset class, investment guidelines and criteria, major investments, and a walkthrough of theoretical sustainable investment dealing and processes, and a report to the General Government Licensing Committee in the second quarter of 2020 on how the City of Toronto can leverage OMERS resources to enhance the city's investment portfolio. And first off, I want to thank everybody for coming in this morning. I really appreciate the presentation and all the work that OMERS does on behalf of the employees of the City of Toronto, who are the largest members of OMERS. And I'm looking at this purely from using, the City of Toronto using the resources and the talent and the research skills that OMERS has, in mainly to enhance any work that we're doing across our portfolios as we try and deal with climate change and risk management and our infrastructure. I'm certainly not saying that we want to muddle in OMERS, for lack of a better word, or direct any investments or funding a particular investment. It's purely we want to gain and learn from the knowledge of OMERS as we move forward into the 21st century. I think OMERS is a great resource to have, and I just want to thank you again for all the work you do, and continue a long, fruitful relationship that we have with OMERS in the City of Toronto. And I also have, I have a second one that I'm moving on behalf of Councillor Layton. Thank you. City Council requests OMERS to meet its fiduciary responsibility to protect the long-term investments of municipal employees and their retirement savings in the face of an unprecedented climate crisis by taking the following steps: joining the growing list of major institutional investors committed to fully aligning their investment practices with the goals of the Paris Agreement, committed to fully understanding the climate risks within its portfolio and disclosing regularly, updating its beneficiaries on the progress to reduce these risks, and establish a broad timeline and targets for cutting high carbon assets from its portfolio and shifting investments into a profitable zero carbon investments.
Questions?
Councillor Karygiannis, question?
Thank you, Chair. Just a question regarding the goals of the Paris Agreement. Would this be the 2005
Yes.
agreement?
Yep.
Would that include any updates that have taken in since then in other parts, or follow-up meetings that,
Yes.
should we put that in there? Would you consider a friendly amendment?
Yeah.
And any updated,
Do you want to say the most current version of the Paris Agreement, or I just understood that?
goals of the Paris Agreement and or
And all,
updates and or updates or additional agreements.
okay, since
Such
2005?
agreements.
You do that, Julie?
The Paris Agreement was 2005. Since 2005 to now, there's been other agreements.
Okay, is that good, Councillor?
That's fine.
Okay. Any other questions of me?
That's fine.
Okay, seeing none. So we have two motions on the screen. I think we can take them together. All in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. All right. And our next item, sorry. Our next item is number 3, GL 11.3, Automated Income Verification for Property Tax, Water, and Solid Waste Relief Programs. Councillor Karygiannis.
Yes, Chair, I do have some questions of staff. We're able to share information with Revenue Canada with staff. There was an agreement that was made a few years back when we were reporting rooming houses through MLS. Are we able to get information when staff are reporting rooming houses as to the revenue that the owner of the house is declaring, in order to see what, like if they have 5 or 6 renters in there, what they're reporting?
So,
Is there somebody that can answer Councillor Karygiannis' question?
so Councillor, I'm not clear. That's not relevant to the to this particular request. Certainly, we would always comply with CRA's expectations with respect to legislation, Income Tax Act legislation, and privacy at the same time.
Let me try this one more time, please, and see where I'm going with this. And I want to thank you through the chair. It was a few years back when we were reporting illegal rooming houses. We were able to send some of that information to Revenue Canada. Are you aware if this is still the practice? Are we sharing that information with them? Are we able to see what the individual is declaring in his or her income tax in view of having a room in house, if they're reporting the full amount that they get to Revenue Canada?
So if this was with respect to a Revenue Canada audit, we would be required to comply from an information request from CRA. We would not have access to somebody's income tax return except for very specific purposes.
All right, thank you.
Sorry. Oh, that was it? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Karygiannis. Other questions on number 3? Sorry, I did have one. I had a financial question about the, in the financial impact statement. So it says there's going to be $190,000 setup cost, and then it says assuming. What happens if the assumption doesn't get met? Is that $190,000 cost going to be higher, lower?
I will take that through you, Mr. Chair. That is an estimate for the one-time setup costs with the CRA to negotiate the agreement with the CRA and to do the development and testing of the online portal that applicants will use. So those are one-time costs. Those are our best estimates. This isn't a particularly elaborate online front-end system. So those are our best estimates of what this would cost to set up.
Okay, so you're not going to come back 3 months from now and say, holy cow, it just climbed up to $400,000.
These would be costs that are internal to the city. So these are these are costs that we would incur simply for the setup of this. We don't anticipate that we'll be coming back asking for additional monies because these are internal costs. These aren't fees that we're paying to the CRA, so it's not going to end up in costing us more than we anticipate with the CRA. It's simply internal development costs.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Are there any questions, other questions of staff on number 3? Councillor Holyday.
Thank you. I think it's just a technical question. Is the agreement two ways? So we're primarily going to get data on income to qualify people applying for some benefits from the city. But do we in turn provide information back to CRA about the qualifications? Do we help them?
Through the chair, it's a one-way information share. So we are obtaining information from CRA as part of this agreement to facilitate the application process.
Are they interested in the reverse, the information going back the other way? And can we facilitate that?
We can certainly ask if there's information that they are interested in that we have at our disposal.
Is the disclosure, because in the report I think it talks about setting up the correct disclosures at the beginning of the process. Are they generic enough to allow that to occur?
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, I think the question there is applicants to the program give us their authorization to contact the CRA to obtain from CRA the information as it relates to their income. We would have to, in sharing information with the CRA, first obtain the approval of applicants to the program, that this would be a reciprocal sharing arrangement. We didn't contemplate that. The CRA has not to date asked for that. So we are simply setting this up initially as a one-way flow of information from the CRA with the applicant's consent that we speak to the CRA to obtain that information.
If they asked for it, though, we would then have to change the upfront wording. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we would have to ensure that applicants, in providing information, were providing us their permission to share that information.
And the
We only collect information for the purposes that we state we're collecting it for.
So the one thing that we do on our side of the line, if I read the report correctly, is that we potentially will tie together all of the people that live in a house to determine the household income. So I think part of the process is the applicant needs to get the consent from everyone in the house to pull the data from CRA. So if you've got
Correct.
a fairly large group of people there, you've got maybe the senior that's applying the homeowner, but they would also take into account the others in the house, the other adults. That is data that CRA may not have. They may not know who's in a single household, or would they?
They would only have mailing address information for the people that are submitting income tax returns. They would have that information on file, their files. They theoretically, yes, they could use that information to verify their own records. Again, they have not asked for that flow of information.
Do they not, does not the CRA, or at least Ontario, through the common tax return, do they not provide a benefit to seniors for housing based on income? Based on property taxes paid, I believe.
There is a provincial income tax credit, yes,
Right.
to offset property taxes, yes.
Okay, would you be confident, though, that if a day turned around where they said, can you help us with the reverse flow, because that will help us with our programs, that we could implement that? I guess it would be a language change.
And I think we would certainly go back to corporate access and privacy and legal to understand the implications of us collecting and sharing that information on behalf of the applicants to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holyday. Other questions of staff on this item? Seeing none. Speakers, Councillor Karygiannis, you held this item?
I'm moving staff recommendations, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Any other speakers on this item? So the recommendations are before us, being moved by Councillor Karygiannis. All in favor? Carried. Our next item is GL 11.4, review of enhanced security measures at Toronto City Hall. We have two registered deputants. The first one, Mr. Miguel Avila Velarde from the Regent Park Neighborhood Association. Morning, sir. You have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
2020. This is my community on January the 1st, 2020. We were shocked. We lost another member from the community due to violence. I'm here to speak on the item GL 11.4 regarding enhanced security. I'm going to call my deputation Airport City Hall, because many of the recommendations by in the undisclosed item on the agenda is private and confidential. I will assume that they are blowing out of proportion, that we need now metal detectors at the door, and really it's going to decrease the participation of civic engagement. But you know what? There is a paranoia you created. So listen, Regent Park lost one member from our community. And this is due because we have a poverty problem in my community of Regent Park. But being a community proactive, we want to request here to these members, to the community, to this council, to allow members who are video journalists, civic journalists, access to to be voided screening, because they have credentials provided by the Regent Park Focus Media Arts Center. And by the way, that is an agency funded by 3 levels of government. And all of them believe that poverty is associated with violence. So we don't want to create barriers for new journalists, members of the community of Regent Park, mostly minorities like myself. What we want is to ensure that the credentials that some other members of the media. I'm going to send, I'm showing you a letter on the screen about detailing who gets access to city council, second, third floor, where we have currently the metal detectors and the security screening. And it says in paragraph 2 that they allow members of the media guild. So I'm talking about CP24, City TV News, and other bigger media channels that they were inconvenient right from the beginning. They were asked to unload the package of material and tools so that they can be screened for dangerous materials objects to bring into city council. Another person who was affected by this was yourself. Since I've been coming to city councils in the year 2009, I survived David Miller. I survived Raw 4. I have survived John Tory Phase 1 and John Tory Phase 2. This is 2020. We need to allow young members of Regent Park to get access to city council without being, again, traumatized by violence. See, currently, the City of Toronto Police Services is creating Carding 2.0. We are being racialized profile again by the Toronto Police Services. Here's the in the overhead, sorry, the plan of the Toronto Police to collect data based on race. So we are target in our poor communities. So I want to avoid that from happening again. So, and the other recommendation I want to make, as you can see on the overhead, it says, access to Washington's Police Seat Corporate Security. That was December 5, 2018. I had to ask permission from city staff to access a public washroom because it was locked. You know what happened here is that we don't have conversation among the issues that are important, such as disability. Who among you has a disability? Who requires to go to pee like myself? I had diabetes. I had to go pee 3 times, 4 times, because that's my system. That's how I'm damaged. So I want you to view this situation under the scope of disability. So I encourage you, all of you, to contact the Toronto Accessibility Advisory Committee led by Councillor Kristen Wontang, so that we can have proper consultations and avoid situations where I have asked for a special disability accommodation and it was denied. And they gave me a toilet card. That was the work of experts, my friends. A toilet card to get to third floor city council chamber.
Miguel, can you wrap it up, please?
So I want to ask you again, allow Regent Park community civic journalists access and not being demoralized for coming to city council and be able to, through the social development plan and the Regent Park.
Sorry, Mr. Avila, can you wrap it up, please?
Yes, Mr. Councilor. I want to ask you to be progressive. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputant? Councillor Karagianis.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to the deputant, I really appreciate you coming to make a deputation, and certainly being diabetic myself, I realize the challenges that you face. However, have you ever visited Queen's Park or Parliament Hill?
Yes, I had. I know that they have similar procedures.
So they have these procedures that we want to put in place here at the front door of Queen's Park, and certainly at the front door of Parliament Hill. Would I be correct?
Well, my whole deputation is allowing members of the community civic journalists of Regent Park access as similar as a member of the big media members, such as CP24 and CTV News. And yes, we want to create this, and I cannot stop it, my friend. This is something that the world is coming to. It is shameful that we have to be mistrust of anybody. Like, I've been coming to city council since 2009. And this is way
Through the chair, if I may. My question was simple. Queen's Park and Parliament Hill have similar things that we want to implement here. Would I be correct? Simple yes or no, please, Mr. Avila.
The only difference, my friend, is that the community disability groups were consulted, not here at City Council. That's not happening right now. And it didn't happen in the first phase of the enhanced security systems approved by City Council and effective on December the 5th, 2019. So that is my answer.
Mr. Avila, thank you, but my question was simple. Isn't,
What the hell is this? Is this a court of law? Is it being cross-examined? Stop this nonsense.
I know the feeling, I know. Chris, come on, Councilor. Are you losing your seat at City Council? That's the reason you want to offend me? Is that the reason you want to offend me, Jim?
Mr. Avila,
sir?
I know you're going to lose your seat, I know that.
sorry, so, Counselor,
Thank you.
Let's speak to real talk. Let's talk about violence. No more deaths of people.
Mr.
No more
Avila.
young people dead.
Mr. Avila, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.
Sorry,
Janice,
Mr.
you, sir.
Moran, Counselor? Mr. Moran?
My mom called me Derek.
Sorry, did I call you Mr. Moran?
Oh,
My apologies.
I just
It's
want to
early
say
in the
about,
day. I need more coffee.
I just want to say about me speaking at this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent expressed or implied in doing so as fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. And let the record show I do not consent to the unconstitutional searches violating Section 8 of the Constitution, Act 1982, that are currently taking place here at Toronto City Hall, as the province has never given the City of Toronto express statutory authority to do this. And just to allude to what Councillor Karygiannis was saying to Miguel, Justice Copeland in Langenfeld versus the Police Board actually brought up that nobody's bothered to challenge the searches that they do at Queen's Park. So I just want to acknowledge Councillor Carroll for alluding to something I said at Special Governance recently, that nowhere in Toronto City Council procedures is there a rule that says people who go to speak at City of Toronto public meetings can't ask questions of their public servants. So in this report, you guys have a paragraph which implies that one of the reasons that you're cracking down on these unconstitutional searches further is because there are those out there who have developed a grievance towards the City of Toronto, real or perceived. And I thought about that, and I recall something that Scott Duncan on Facebook once told to somebody who had a grievance towards government, and this was the advice he gave him. Raging at the government is like raging at that fire truck. It's pointless, and the fire truck doesn't care how mad you are. It's just a fire truck. Do you really think the government, they care about what you have to say? When they realize there is a problem, they stay quiet, like you and Councillor Perks did at the last library board meeting, Councillor Ainsley, because government work feeds their families. They really choose their families over your rights, and all the while, the law society laughs at you. So you get mad at that fire truck all you like. The people spraying you think it's hysterical. The government does not respect your rights because lawyers told them not to. You are raging at the wrong people, just like you are programmed to. Because I'm thinking at the next city council, if Councillor Perks stands up and asks your city solicitor, Wendy Wahlberg, like he did the last time this came up, I have a pretty good idea what she's going to say. She's going to say that, well, the Langenfeld decision by Justice Copeland was overturned at the Court of Appeal, but she probably won't mention because the Court of Appeal found out that decided that Chief Saunders had the common law powers to do it. And if you read Section 42.3 of the Police Services Act, it does say in there that a police officer does have the powers and duties ascribed to a constable at common law. However, that doesn't apply to you guys. So in City of Toronto versus Prince, 1934, the Supreme Court of Canada said, in the words of Lord Haldane in delivering the judgment of the Judicial Committee in McKay versus City of Toronto, this corporation is not the creature of charter and as such endowed with capacity by the common law, but it is the pure creation of a statute. So you guys won't be able to use that excuse. In Greater Vancouver Transportation Authority versus Canadian Federation of Students, 2009, Supreme Court of Canada said, no matter how broadly the word law is defined for the purposes of Section 1, a policy that is administrative in nature does not fall within the definition because it is not intended to be a legal basis for government action. In Green versus Law Society of Manitoba, 2017, the Supreme Court of Canada said, rules made by law societies are akin to bylaws passed by municipal councils. I read that as bylaws passed by municipal councils are akin to rules made by law societies. Now, the rules of the law society don't apply to me because I'm not a member of the law society. So using the Supreme Court's own logic, your bylaws don't apply to me because I'm not a member of the City of Toronto, the corporation. And I just want to point out that Deputy City Clerk John Elvidge recently found out that you people don't actually have a set definition for what a bylaw is for the public to be given proper notice of in regards to your council procedures, which I know Councillor Holliday here is very fond of. So I just wanted to point that out. You might want to go to the province so the public has a good idea of what a bylaw that you guys are using against us actually is. Supreme Court of Canada in Canadian Pacific versus Ottawa Fire Insurance, 1907, it may be said that of necessity, municipal institutions must be corporations. And I just want to make sure, Councillor Ainsley, you didn't think I was lying to you at the last library board meeting, where I pointed out, it's right around here, from the May 30, last year Toronto Police Services Board meeting, Chief Saunders gives a great explanation of what the applicability of a bylaw is. The provisions of this bylaw shall apply to all members and employees of the service and the board in relation to the City of Toronto. Your bylaws apply to you people. They don't apply to me and Miguel. We don't work for the City of Toronto.
Thank you, Derek. Appreciate it. Any questions for Derek? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming in this morning. Appreciate your insights. Twice. I thought it was 3 times.
Yeah, 3 times.
Okay, questions of staff on this item? No, Councillor Kierjian?
Questions that we might have because there was a confidential attachment. Do we have to go on camera?
Only if you ask questions about the confidential attachment in public.
I will be.
Okay, so then we would need to go into, okay. All right, are there any other questions by members they'd like to ask in public?
No, I'm just wondering, before we go in camera, I just have a deferral motion for...
And I think we'll go into camera at the end.
Oh, okay.
We'll go into camera at the end of the meeting.
If the deferral motion, if everybody's okay with it, we don't need to take that item in camera.
I was going to ask the same thing, like, if we want to just easily move and support the deferral motion, then we don't need to delve.
Sorry, you're talking on item number 5.
Number 5.
Yeah, so we're going to go in camera at the end of the meeting.
But
on number 4, we're going to go
Councillor
into...
Fillion is asking, which I agree with, is that it may not be necessary to go into camera on number 5 if we're all comfortable with just supporting his motion.
Yeah.
So we're talking about 5.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I thought we were going in camera immediately, so.
No.
Yeah,
So you can do the deferral motion now.
Yeah, so...
before we go in, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Good. That's
So
fine.
on item number 4, does anybody have any questions of staff that they would like to ask in public?
You know what? Let's just.
Okay, so we're going to hold this item down?
No, 4. I will withdraw the request to go on camera.
Oh, okay, you don't need to go on camera. Okay. All right, so are there any questions on this item?
No, I'll just move, Mr. Chairman, the recommendations.
Okay, so I just had one question to staff, and that was around how we're looking at using, or going to be using artificial intelligence to deal with security measures.
Through you, Mr.
And I ask that only because I've read it. Around this item, I've read a number of different articles. One was around using artificial intelligence. I believe casinos, for example, are using it now instead of having the metal detectors that you go through. They have scanners embedded in the walls that can determine if somebody's carrying a weapon without having to go through the big scanner. And then the other scenario that I read about was in schools now, they can use artificial intelligence to monitor security cameras all the time, so you don't need a live person to be watching the camera. So I'm trying to understand if that's something we're going to be looking at for security at City Hall or city facilities in the future.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I draw your attention to page 7 of the report where we talk about a number of recent technologies on the market. We are assessing those technologies. in some facilities, not City of Toronto-owned facilities, but some facilities in the City of Toronto are set to test some of those technologies in 2020. We are carefully analyzing the results of those, but it's a little premature at this standpoint in our review of the material for that yet. What it does state in the report as well is if we make that recommendation to use those type of technologies, we would come back to City Council and seek approval.
Okay. And the only reason I'm asking that, so around artificial intelligence, you know, I think the biggest angst that people have about going into City Hall and our lobby are the metal detectors. They're big and bulky. And there's many facilities now, and I'll point once again to casinos in Windsor, where you go up to the desk, you check in, and you're scanned. You don't know you're being scanned. It's much less intrusive than having having people go through the scanner. And then in terms of monitoring security cameras using artificial intelligence, you don't have somebody monitoring the camera all the time that can miss things.
Through Mr. Chair, I'm going to break those up into two pieces.
Yep.
So I'll tackle the camera piece first. So we do use some smart technologies in some camera systems now. They're not facial recognition or anything like that, but it could be object detection. So an object being left somewhere for an extended period of time and the camera notifies us of that. It could be wrong way movement, that a car is going the wrong way down an area, that would alert the operator to that. Then there's all kinds of integrations as well with the camera system for alarms. An alarm goes off, the nearest camera shoots and captures that image. When it comes to the metal detectors that you're talking about, there's a media right now about one they're going to be testing at the Metro Toronto Convention Centre. It's public knowledge. They're going to be testing it for a month in early 2020. We are carefully watching that. It is very similar to what you've talked about. Multiple screenings of individuals at a time, seeking very specific signatures of metal and non-metallic objects. And the sensors continue to learn through AI about what is a weapon and what is a cell phone, or what is a weapon and what is a set of keys. So we are carefully watching that.
Okay. And do you have any idea, so if I moved a motion that said to report back on options using artificial intelligence for security measures in city facilities, could I say June 2020? Or do you need more time than that? I'm just trying to be cognizant of the public perception that they don't want City Hall and city facilities to be look like an armed camp, for lack of a better word, and having intrusive and going through metal detectors, but at the same time making use of artificial intelligence.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think 6 months is a little premature because we're going to have to get the results of some of the other testing that's happening. At some public facilities in the United States, they're testing some similar technologies, about 3 or 4 on the market that are taking that market share. I think if you said we report in 2020, that would probably be a more reasonable request.
I did say June 2020.
Yeah, I was talking more end of 2020.
So if I said
by the end of 2020.
So November 2020.
Yeah, thank you.
Our November 2020 meeting. Okay, all right, thank you. Councillor Matlow, did I see your hand?
Well, staff have been very clear and consistently clear about your recommendations to us. Thing I love about this place, this is a question, and I know a lot of us do, is that it's such a public building. You can see school kids walking around and the childcare kids and weddings, and the city is within the fabric of this building. Are you, while you may move forward with what we may support, putting an emphasis on doing it in a way that protects the free experience, the public space experience that residents and employees and all of us have in this building, so that it doesn't become like a Fort Knox experience that we keep referring to Queen's Park and Parliament, but maybe that's not the model we really want to look at. Is that an emphasis? Is that a priority to you as you move forward?
Through you, Mr. Chair, absolutely. You know, it's imperative that when we do this, that we make this a friendly, customer-focused experience. You know, there's no intention to restrict the public access. What we're doing is taking reasonable steps. We want to remain very transparent. We just want to remain safer, and this is really about safety from that side. I think with the measures that we've done over time and even the last year, there's been very, very relatively few complaints or issues with them. I think the security staff do an excellent job in that regard and would continue in this case.
Thank you.
Other questions of staff on this item? Seeing none. Speakers?
I've moved the recommendation.
so you-
And did you want to amend it to?
I have a motion here that I'm moving.
Okay.
That City Council will request the Executive Director of Corporate Real Estate Management and appropriate staff to report to the General Government Licensing Committee at its meeting on November 30th, 2020 on using artificial intelligence technology for the development of new security methods and options for the City of Toronto. Sorry, Councillor Kirigensi had a question? Of me?
Yes, sir. This motion that you're having is to get a report back. This motion is not in any way, shape, or form prohibits us with moving with the recommendations we have here today. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. Any other speakers? Okay. Can we take the two motions together? All in favor? Carried. And our next item, sorry, number 5, Councillor Filion.
Yes, I'd like to move deferral. I think the clerk has the motion. Just to the next meeting, which is March the 9th.
We're on number 5. Yeah. I think we have a consensus on this. All in favor of the motion on the screen? Carried. Our next item, number 10. Next item is number 10, amendment to blanket contract number 47021763 with Enterprise Car Share and 47019969 with Zipcar Canada Incorporated for car sharing services. I held the item. Does anybody have any questions on this before asked? No? Okay. So I simply, and I'm not sure, so in the report it mentions a number of different areas that are using car sharing now, but it mentions the money that we're going to put in this to extend the contract, but there's no mention of any money, like what are the savings? Are we saving any money?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's something that we've tried to quantify, and it's very difficult to quantify. In cases, there's one example in public health where they managed to do away with city vehicles as well as the parking space that they were renting for that purpose. Absolutely, in those cases. In the other cases, we've had a little more trouble quantifying and extracting that information from the respective divisions' budgets.
And sorry, I don't understand, and I guess the problem I'm having is trouble understanding why we can't quantify what the savings are. When I originally brought this forward, I was in Chicago many years ago now, I'll say 2012, and I met with the City of Chicago transportation staff and Zipcar at the time, and they were showing me numbers of how much, what their fleet services, for example, and I believe it was recreation because they had a fleet of pickup trucks. They were able to show me clearly the savings, and it was the City of Chicago that they had a spreadsheet, and they clearly showed me what their expenditures were in their fleet services using Zipcar or their commercial services, as opposed to before they had it. So I guess I'm having trouble understanding why we're using it in, I think, 8 different areas now, and can't quantify any savings.
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, I remember the discussions around Chicago, and we have worked with the respective divisions to try to capture that information and quantify savings, but it hasn't worked as well as we would like.
Yeah. So I guess I hope you can see from my perspective,
Absolutely.
you're asking for, another $270,000 to put into this program, but we're also not seeing any savings or quantified savings.
Again, through you, Mr. Chair, going forward with the budgets, one of the things we're trying to do is reduce the number of underutilized vehicles and mitigate fleet size growth and so forth, and quantifying what that growth might be in relation to what it is or what vehicles have been reduced is difficult. So.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sure.
Through the chair, I think one of the things that council approved is, through an audit review that we did was the centralization of fleet and the work that's required there. And I think that will help us also to get to your question, Chair, as to how to quantify this. And I think that's going to be very helpful as we move down the path. And we do have to bring a report at the end of this year back to committee regarding that centralization. Okay.
Okay. Yep. Councillor Holliday, questions?
Thanks. Through you to Lloyd, is there any chance this is costing us more?
Through the chair, that's one thing we actually do monitor. So we know where the break-off point is as far as where car share, and then in October 2019, we brought forward an initiative for fleet share, which is sharing city vehicles, where we look at those costs, and if we identify that they could have used a city vehicle or other options, we do let the divisions know.
So we may not know how much savings there is, but we're definitely further ahead in doing this program. Have I got that right?
That's correct.
And if you ever found a day where it was costing more, could we be comfortable that you'd come back to the committee or budget committee, whoever it is, to say, there's a better way to do it?
Through the chair, that's correct. And actually, one of the options that I think has more viability is the fleet, what we call fleet share. This is using the city vehicles with car sharing technology in them. That has a lot of viability because with all of the public works yards and so forth.
Are there any periphery costs to us with the car share program? For instance, if we're buying less city vehicles because of this, because car share is replacing them, are we losing on buying discounts or something else that may be an unintended or a discovered consequence of using outsourced service vehicles?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no. Actually, we've one of the things that we have that is unique to the City of Toronto in Canada is we have manufacturer direct agreements where we get exceptional pricing on vehicles, and that pricing doesn't change with the variance. And as Josie mentioned, with looking at centralization, there's actually greater benefit across the city as a whole that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on this item? Seeing none. Speakers? I held the item. I just want to thank you for your work on this. I know it's been a long process, and I'm hoping as we're working on the financials in the city and that we'll be able to have some more quantification of this in the future. Thank you very much. I'm going to move the recommendations on, number 10. All in favor? Carried. Number 11, amendment to purchase order number 604-7698, issued to SAP Canada for the procurement of additional professional services for success factors for the city's enterprise-wide transformation program. I held this item. Does anybody have any questions on this other than me? Seeing none. So I'm not sure who I'm asking this, Mr. Ida. So I'm just trying to understand the financial outlay on this. So this originally in May 8th, 9th last year, there was $805,562, another roughly $684,000 last July. And we put this program, my understanding, so the end of last year, 2019 is when we had it fully in place?
Yes, it was through the chair. It was September 2019 is when the rollout occurred.
Yeah. So I'm trying to understand, so in the rationale on page 4 for this, it said to continue the work to stabilize the platform and resolve issues with implementing workflows. And we put it in place in September, and now staff are asking for another $975,000. And I'm trying to understand, we've just put it in place. We followed an RFP. The RFP in the document, it also says success factors met was 92% of the top requirements. And we put it in place, and 6 months later, we need another $975,000 odd dollars to iron the kinks out, for lack of a better word. So I'm trying to understand the financial outlay. We had an RFP. This company was picked because it met 92% of the requirements, and 6 months after, we need more money.
So let me.
I don't understand if that's a standard practice or why we're doing this.
So I'll just go through in terms of there. So this is one of the largest, I guess, digital transformations within the city through the chair. And part of it was that following the implementation in September 2019, there were a number of lessons learned that were focused on 3 key areas. Process workflows within the organization in terms of how we're modernizing the sort of paper-based workflows, as well as some of the technology roll through. So what became very evident is that as we went through the process is that success factor that was picked through, there's some specialist expertise that as we started rolling out through the city, that it became apparent that we needed professional services from success factor to help us stabilize that investment. Just based on that expertise, we just don't have in the city in terms of, or we're very limited. So it's really about asking the extra authority in terms of, we have the financials based on, if you look at actually page 2, that actually shows through the professional and technical services, the 2 sort of budget areas, the authority to go to SAP with some specialist skills and to help us walk through the stability of this platform based on the size of the rollout of the city.
So I guess why kind of the red flags. So this was a non-competitive agreement that we did with SAP. So in the report it said it met 92% of the requirements. So the money, the outlay or the financial top-up that is it being asked for today, is that because that 8% that success factor didn't meet?
So what the out of the box would have met that, but what we are finding is that through the change management process, it's taking existing some of the ways that in the city that we, from a standard operating procedure, and converting that is customized into meet most of those out of the box. So that's a change management exercise. In some areas it worked, there's no issues. In some other areas we've had to customize that, but we're trying to limit the customization in terms of to have standard workflow. So that additional 8%, I don't think this is a platform conversation in terms of it meets. I think this is a change management of trying to take some of our existing ways we do work in the city to make it a standardized. Overall, strategically, we want to limit customization. But the reality is that through change management and through working with each of our colleagues, that there's a need to understand what those business processes would mean, but also to be respectful that we're not trying to take a platform and just to essentially fit it in, but to actually modernize that business process. And that goes across the whole areas. I think that before we roll out the technology platforms, we need to do more business process re-engineering. So now what has occurred is that because some of that business process re-engineering being a large implementation to this size, and we're not unique, 70% of the rollout of this platform goes through this experience. We're now doing a reverse, and that's where we need SAP. But it's the business process re-engineering I would really recommend as an organization that we need to invest before we start rolling out the technology platform.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. And I guess just the last question. So there was a reference in the report to 8 projects that are being rolled out next year and in 2021. Could I get a list of those? It's not urgent.
Yes, through the chair, we'll make sure that's available.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to thank staff for their work on this and move the recommendations. All in favor? Carried. And I think we're done? I think we're done, aren't we? We're done. Yes, we do. Yep. Yep. Councillor Nunziata, who's standing up, moving motion to adjourn. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone.